Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. We're gonna focus on the semiconductor space going into 2025 and try to figure out which of these companies are an interesting bet going into this year. And in my opinion, there's a few options there. Last year started very strongly, and a lot of the companies had halfway through 2024, 52-week highs that were like insane. Some of them were well above 100% up until late summer of 2024. Then we saw a little bit of a regression, even for Nvidia, that was kind of stuck around 130 to 140 for essentially 4 or 5 months at the end of the year. But going into this year, I still find obviously AMD very attractive at this kind of prices. We will go into it further in the video. But more importantly as well, I think Micron is really interesting. Remember that the spend of Nvidia, the largest share of their spending, and they also ever so increasingly for their AI GPUs, is not going to go to Taiwan Semiconductor, but it's rather going to the memory manufacturer. In Nvidia's case, it's going to go to SK Hynix, the Korean memory manufacturer that has a lead on HBM3 and HBM4. But I think Micron is, although they didn't have a whole lot of revenue coming from HBM last year in 2024, they seem to be able to have around 6 to 7 billion in revenue coming from HBM this year. And remember, as the large language models increase in size, the parameter size increases, and they're also gonna, have this new thing with the newer models where it kind of have in the memory more context, right? So the more context they have, these large language models like ChatGPT and Cloud or whatever it is, then they're gonna need a higher memory, right? Higher memory bandwidth, and also higher memory in terms of gigabytes. And that's where Micron comes into the picture for being essentially the only American memory manufacturer that is just venturing into HBM in terms of like billions. So I think Micron for me is really, really interesting. We can also see that the stock currently is expected to have our earnings per share at around 7 or so US dollar in 2025. And the price is currently at 84. And if we zoom in a little bit on Micron specifically, we can also see that if you look at like the 5-year chart, traditionally the memory manufacturers is very cyclical. But specifically right now, due to that the only manufacturers of HBM are Micron, SK Hynix and Samsung. We know that Samsung seems to be struggling a little bit, SK Hynix being ahead and Micron playing catch up, but they seem to also, like, Micron seems to be really, really close to SK Hynix technologically wise. We also know that on the political turn, with the new administration in USA, it's possible that they're gonna get more subsidies from the U.S. government, like due to Donald Trump and his stance on foreign companies compared to U.S.-based companies. Same kind of theory about Intel, right? Maybe Intel is gonna be benefited by this new administration. So I think there's the political landscape playing for Micron. We can see that it's a cyclical business, and we are at the beginning for the memory manufacturers, like cycle that we have never seen before. In terms of HBM usage, I mean, there's projections that HBM sales will be up to 100 billion US dollar in 4 or 5 years from now, from like 20 billion in 2024. And if Micron continues to have like the same kind of market share that they have in the other memory types, I think they are potentially gonna gain market share here. We could see Micron with 25 to 35% market share on HBM. That could represent a 35 billion US dollar opportunity for Micron, in addition to the legacy business that they have, but with extremely high margins. And we know that there's only 3 players and there's only one American player here. So I think the risk to reward for Micron here is like insanely good. So I wouldn't be surprised that the price target for this Micron stock. In fact, let's go to TipRanks and just type in Micron Technologies and let's see what the price target is. And I think it was, you can see 62% on average upside to this current stock price, with the price street high target of 250. So I genuinely think Micron is a great opportunity, not only because just the history of the company, but also just that we know that the newer AI GPUs are gonna be like memory starved. A lot of people are thinking that TSMC is the stopper, But you have to remember that actually none of these companies that we are following, neither AMD or NVIDIA, are utilizing TSMC's newer node for the AI GPUs. They are still stuck on 5, 6, and 4 nanometers, obviously venturing into 3 nanometer at some point this year. But remember that 3 nanometer has been used by Apple for at least 2 generations now, so at least a couple of years. So I don't think that the stopper here is TSMC, at least not in the logic manufacturing. You could argue that the packaging step, where they combine the memories and the the HBM memory and the chip and all the other stuff, that's where probably also a higher limiting factor right now. But considering everything, I find Micron really interesting. In my upcoming videos, I will look further at ASML, which is also very important, especially as we go into the finer manufacturing nodes. Like if you go below 2 nanometer or maybe even 14 angstroms, which is like 1.4 nanometers for Intel, I think the utilization of the second generation ASML machines is gonna be through the roof. Even the memory manufacturers at some point are discussing utilization of EUV machines, which probably within a couple of years will cost close to $500 million each. Yeah, you heard that right. $500 million US per machine, and ASML could easily ramp up capacity to, I mean, 40, 50, even 70 of these machines in 2 or 3 years' time on a yearly run rate with insane margins. I mean, if TSMC increases their prices, NVIDIA increases the prices, why wouldn't ASML do that, right? So I think ASML is also a good opportunity here. And finally, AMD. Now, there's a lot of discussions out there. Let's start with Raja Kaduri, which worked at AMD as a senior GPU lead vice president in AMD a few years back. Then he went to Intel to do the same kind of stuff. And he seems to be very impressed. If you follow his Twitter here, he seems to be very impressed with how much of a progress AMD has done on the software side, right, compared to NVIDIA's CUDA mode. So it's really interesting to see someone like an industry insider with immense kind of experience, and someone that is like a one in a, I would say probably there's like tens of maybe 10 people on the planet with knowledge about GPUs at the level of Raja Kaduri on the planet, right? So this guy, he knows his stuff. Then we have this company TensorWave. And why do I talk about TensorWave? Well, for AMD, the biggest purchaser of AMD MI Instinct GPUs has been Meta. I think Meta is like something like 100 and or so 170,000 AMD AI GPUs. Then Microsoft just around 100,000. Then Oracle around 40,000, and then TensorWave. Now TensorWave are going out there and being quite cryptic on X or on Twitter. They had, for example, this discussion with responded to a question on Twitter, and the guy on Twitter asked like, this cluster must be huge. How many times bigger than Colossus? Remember, Colossus is Elon Musk's XAI largest AI cluster, I think, on the planet at around 100,000 or so chips, which is that's a absolute immense kind of AI data center. AI data center with, I think, capacity of up to 200,000 H100 and H200s, which will consume something stupid like 1 gigawatt or so of power, right? More than like entire cities at some point. And the interesting part is that they responded to a question which referenced Colossus, which is currently a 100 to 150,000 unit based on NVIDIA GPUs. And they are talking that next year, or like in 2025, this year now, they're gonna have AMD kind of server cloud in server nodes with probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of AMD MI300 or MI350Xs. So there's a lot going for AMD as well. Some more like little bit of a cautious comments from this gentleman here, Dylan Patel, which has a running the semi-analysis webpage, and I think though his consensus is that AMD will do well even in this year, maybe lose a little bit market share. That kind of worries me a little bit because Dylan really knows his stuff. He has a company that looks into all this supply chain of the AI GPUs and the general semiconductor space. But all that being said, I think necessarily like it's possible that AMD loses a little bit market share in 2025 compared to last year, but not necessarily like unit volume wise, right? And remember that also the market is collectively growing. So if AMD gets a slightly lesser part of the much bigger pie, I'm happy with it, right? And there's still an opportunity that AMD will land a bigger customer. Like, I mean, sure, Dylan Patel says that maybe both Meta and Microsoft will be less dependent on AMD next year than they this year in 25 than they were in 2024. But we have to also understand that AMD's MI350X chip will definitely be much more competitive on the training side. And we already know that even Dylan said that AMD is already very competitive on inferencing side, and on inference, they're gonna be even in a higher lead, I think, AMD this year. So it's and in addition to that, they will have a nice lead on inference. We know that the market is demanding more inference because we consumers out there are using these AI models like ChatGPT, Cloud, or whatever it is. So a lot is like going for AMD as well. And adding to that, you've been following me. I will not show you the models today because I think just the more broader spectrum is that it's just a very, very nice kind of price right now, I think, on the stock. I can easily see AMD do $1.5 earnings per share on a quarterly basis, like $6 or $7 earnings per share for this year, or maybe even if they really, really manage to do a nice improvement event next year, probably $10 earnings per share or close to that in 2026, which means that you're buying this company at around 12 times PE ratio for next year, which is very close to what we actually were looking for also at Micron, right? Micron is expected to do, I think, anywhere between 10 to $12 in earnings per share for 2026. And you can buy the company right now. Micron is, I think, at 80. There we have $84. So when I look at the list, I find AMD and Micron very, very interesting. ASML looks very good, to be honest. Even ARM has an extremely high PE ratio, but we have to look into further detail in a longer video specifically about ARM and see if the general x86 market is slowly and surely losing market share to ARM. And if they kind of start to increase their prices per license, so they're gaining price more average sales price per license, and they're also gaining market share. And we know that x86 is like billions and billions of units out there on global, like PCs, laptops, data centers. So when you consider all of this, I think even ARM could potentially be a really interesting company, although it's a very expensive company currently. But again, if everything goes right, they could easily be a much, much larger company. Again, Nvidia also doesn't mean that I'm not expecting them to like 2 or 3x this year, but could they do 20, 30, 40%, especially if the general market goes up? For sure, the revenue most likely will increase, and we know that the likes of Meta, the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, Google, all of these big companies are kind of investing a lot of money, and they actually mentioned a couple of them that they are not scared of going to zero free cash flow, right? So they're gonna essentially spend as much money as they possibly can without risking those huge companies' future in the AI hardware and software. So there's definitely capital coming into even in 2025. So when you consider all of this, I genuinely don't see why a lot of these companies wouldn't do great this year. Even the likes of Marvell Technologies, I think even Marvell is an interesting option there. But yeah, so generally, I think I would go for Micron and AMD right now. That's my two best picks at the current stage. This is not investment advice. I'm just sharing my ideas with you. But please engage in the discussion. Do you think Micron is a maybe once in a 5-year opportunity, and the same for AMD after the disappointment in last year, especially for AMD, despite them having a strong start of the year, right? We know that they went all the way up to $227, and then found themselves essentially losing half of that throughout the year after March or April. So yeah, what do you think? Are these two good picks for the current state going into 2025? Please like, subscribe, engage in a discussion, and see you in the next one.